Welcome to the NASCAR News Zone here on Motorsports Reports. My name is Phil, and I'll be introducing this week's big news stories that we discussed here on Motorsports Reports. We talked about the article written on Beyond the Flag about stage racing and how that may be the next thing that possibly should be removed from NASCAR's top 3 series. And also Kyle Petty's views on Cleetus McFarland's massive ascent into now the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series here in a few weeks' time at Rockingham Speedway. These stories and more will be discussed on this week's NASCAR News Zone. If you want to specifically pinpoint which story, it'll be time-stamped in the comments below. And thank you as always for watching us here on Motorsports Reports and tuning into the NASCAR News Zone. And for all NASCAR, IndyCar, and other motorsports updates, stay with us here and also listen to the Gripster podcast that I do with my co-host Josh that appears on all podcast platforms. We can add Kyle Petty to the list of people who has his thoughts on Cleetus McFarland's impending O'Reilly Series debut at the start of April at Rockingham Speedway. For Petty, he came out and openly admitted on an interview on the Daily Downforce his beginnings of his racing career. And even Dale Jr. has brought it up in regards to Cleetus McFarland's rise. Kyle Petty was quoted as saying, "This is the pot calling the kettle black. Let me go ahead and say that, because when I started, I was 18, I had no experience." End quote. Kyle Petty was famously thrown into the passenger seat, which really wasn't a seat, of his father, the King, Richard Petty's Dodge, and drove around the Daytona International Speedway in 1978, and that was his first experience in a car. And then he drove the ARCA Series event at Daytona in February of 79 and famously won as a very raw and inexperienced rookie. But Petty uses the fact that there are way more opportunities to develop before reaching the national levels, and that there should be value towards working through those levels before getting into what is the number 2 series, a AAA of NASCAR, so to speak. Petty is quoted as saying, "This is a professional sport, okay? Let me be real clear here. NASCAR is the top. It's the top of motorsports. It is the elite." In terms of the contrast here, he's saying all you have to do is be a NASCAR, O'Reilly, or truck driver to get to that level. Is you have your parents buy you a video game when you're young so you can learn how to drive on a sim, or have 10 million YouTube followers. And I think it comes from the fact that McFarland, Garrett Mitchell, has had 5 ARCA starts and only 1 truck appearance. He wrecked 6 laps into his Truck Series debut at Daytona. He wrecked 17 laps into his ARCA debut at Daytona last year. Then he had an accident in the truck at Rockingham when testing to get approved for Daytona. But in terms of it goes further than that, I guess. For KP, he goes and says, "I just don't think that in this day and time, when we have so many forms of race and so many ways to get here, that just because you're a celebrity or an internet sensation, you should be able to walk through the gates and get in one of these cars. Don't come here if all you are is an internet sensation, because you've got no place on the racetrack with those guys at the Cup level, and you've got really no place with a lot of these guys at the O'Reilly level," which is a very strong statement considering some of the guys that have driven recently in the O'Reilly Series and even in the trucks and ARCA. But the fact is, Cleetus McFarland's is trying to put in the time. He's serious about this, and we'll see what happens with his debut at Rockingham, and if he is approved for Talladega, or if NASCAR tells him that he's going to need more time before he gets on bigger racetracks. But even with that, he has sponsorship, and that opportunity is there, and he's signed for a 3-race deal. So we will see how Cleetus McFarland handles it. We'll see how RCR handles it. and talk about it here on Motorsports Reports. And also, we'll talk about it on the Grip Strip podcast that I do with my co-host Josh. You'll find it appears on all podcast platforms. Add two-time O'Reilly Series champion and safety pioneer Randy Lajoie as someone who has commented on Garrett Mitchell, aka Cleetus McFarland's meteoric rise through the ranks of NASCAR to now being a driver for Richard Childress Racing, at least on a limited basis, for 3 races a year for this year and next year to start, with the sponsorship from Tommy's Express Car Wash. This rise, he's been running ARCA races the last couple of years. He's had plenty of eyes on him. He has 4 million followers, etc., etc. But for the former O'Reilly Series champion Lajoie, who currently runs his seat business, which has revolutionized the safety of racing seats and has prevented so many injuries and, of course, deaths in the sport of NASCAR post all the incidents that took place in the year 2000, and of course the passing of the great Dale Earnhardt. Quoting Lajoie, "It's a different world," he said. "It's about those likes and the people, the followers, all the stuff I don't mind because I'm building him a seat. I'm okay watching him because I know he's going to be safe," end quote. He went further to say, "I do believe we'll get some crash info from him. We'll get some data. We can learn stuff. He's a good kid, good guy, what a deal. Who would have thunk whatever he's done, okay, I'm going to buy me a racetrack, YouTube, and whatever that is, makes him a gazillionaire," end quote. So Lajoie, who's never been shy with his opinions and thoughts, similar to his son Corey, who has a social media presence and also part-time NASCAR racer and works for Amazon Prime on their TV coverage. But for Cleetus McFarland, he will be making his debut at Rockingham in a few weeks' time in an O'Reilly Series car. Dale Earnhardt Jr. has been out there and talked to him during this announcement that he made, and he's come out and said, Dale Jr. said he just needs to be racing more than he's doing, and he needs to get more experience and get better, end quote. He talked about buying a late model, Cleetus McFarland, pro late model, and it sounds like that's what he's going to be doing. He's going to be spending time driving that. He's also going to be driving the O'Reilly Series, may take some additional Truck Series opportunities, and of course ARCA with Rhett Jones Racing. But we will see how Cleetus McFarland does in his debut in the O'Reilly Series at Rockingham in a few weeks' time, one of the more difficult racetracks you could possibly make a debut at, and with the limited number of races that he's done in a stock car. But there'll be plenty of eyes on him, good, bad, or indifferent, and we'll talk about it here on Motorsports Report. A recent article by Beyond the Flags Asher Fair rehashes the new changes to the All-Star race, emphasizes the fact that for the first time in 57 years, Dover Motor Speedway, what was originally Dover Downs International Speedway, will not host a points-paying event. They hosted 2 races from 1971 to 2020, lost the second race in 21, and then now it's lost the points race at least for this year, but it will be a triple header event along with the O'Reilly Series and Truck Series, and they'll have the NASCAR All-Star race there for the first time ever, while North Wilkesboro Speedway will host a points-paying event for the first time since 1996, after most recently hosting the All-Star event the last couple of years. The basically goes over the format, which removes the All-Star Open, which used to be an interesting event, which put more emphasis on the drivers that haven't won a race or haven't won a championship in the past. And it talks about the third segment first, where 17 drivers who were locked in based on those the criteria of winning either in 25 or 26, or being a former Cup Series champion competing full-time, former All-Star race winners that are still full-time as well. So that's one piece of it. Every chartered car will race in the All-Star event, making a single car qualifying attempt along with a 4-tire pit stop. That combined total for 2 laps will go and base the pit stall selection, and then the for the first segment, and that'll also determine lineup for the first segment. Then the top 26 finishers are inverted for the second segment, and then for the third 200 lap segment there will be 26 total drivers. So the top 8 drivers and average finish across the first 2 segments among those not already locked in the main event are set to qualify, as is the winner of the NASCAR fan vote, again not among those already locked in. Then it'll be the starting lineup will be the average finish across the first 2 segments, which makes you actually have to perform throughout the entire race. So that's aspects, and then there's also no promoter's caution. So it can be handled like what would generally be a usual Dover race, in the sense that the stages are set at 75 and 75. Then there'll be an invert in there, and there'll be some other things, but we will see how these cars react. We'll see how the teams react and handle the changes in more detail come a couple months from now at Dover. And for this and more news items in regards to motorsports, tune into Motorsports Reports. The element of having stage breaks and stage points is something that might need to be looked into here as we move forward in NASCAR's Big 3 series. Asher Fair of Beyond the Flag wrote an article about this, first referencing the previous format, the 4-round 10-race knockout championship 4 playoff format that came in 2014 and went until last year. Says the 2014 to 2025 playoff format was widely considered one of the most blatantly gimmicky elements of a sport that has embraced one too many gimmicks over the years, slowly alienating the core fan base and causing more and more fans to head to the exits. They needed the likes of Mark Martin to be in the room for them to make a decision to move towards a chase format again versus a playoff format. It still means that there is a reset after a specific number of races, but after that, it's most points earned. However, the balance of points given out at the end of a race relative to what you can do at certain portions of the race might need to be addressed. The stage racing was put in partly to do with the when you're in format. Also, to be completely fair, I think it was put in because the TV people that were showing the races wanted places where they could guarantee having a yellow and they could go and take commercials instead of what they generally do, which is take a commercial anywhere between 7 and 15 laps every 7 to 15 laps during a green flag run. The stage racing does provide a certain reset, but it also is basically putting in a competition caution at certain points, instead of having the crew chiefs and engineers and teams figure out strategy during the race and having to figure out fuel for the entire race. They're figuring out fuel and tires and everything based on the stages, the stage breaks until the final stage. One thing that Asher Fair brings up is the point value being the 1 point per position, other than the difference between first and second, where they made first 55 points, second 35. It used to be 40, 39 and go down the road. But so there is a difference there, but in theory you could end up winning 2 stages and finish. In his case, he brought up In other words, leading at some random lap during a race could be worth as many as 20 total positions in the race results. It's ludicrous, and the 22nd place finisher could end up tying for second in total points scored simply because of it. The balance is something that probably does need to be addressed. His idea is no stage cautions and more points for race finishes relative to stage results. Hopefully NASCAR doesn't stop making changes just because they've arrived on a new playoff format, and hopefully if year one a new playoff format does turn out to prove that there's still work to be done, NASCAR X. We will see what comes of that. In terms of stage racing, I don't think NASCAR is going to get rid of it anytime soon because of the TV partners. I do think that the addressing of how the points are allotted is probably something that is more likely to come around here as we move forward. But tune in here to Motorsports Reports for all your NASCAR, IndyCar, and other racing news. After an eventful weekend at Phoenix Raceway, here are a few things that we learned from the Cup Series event at the 1 Mile Oval in the desert. My name is Phil from Motorsports Reports, and recapping Jared's article from Motoring Chronicle, and some things that we went over in the article included the call by Ryan Blaney's crew chief Jonathan Hassler with 22 laps to go, the final pit cycle, which saw the driver of the number 12 Ford go and take 2 tires versus 4 tires for the dominant presence in Christopher Bell for Joe Gibbs Racing in his number 20 Toyota, which saw Ryan Blaney line up on the outside of row 2, while Christopher Bell ended up starting 8th. There was an immediate yellow that included Ty Dillon, Zane Smith, John Hunter Nemechek, and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. soon after that pit stop, and then having to go through traffic affected the ability of Bell to be able to go and pass Blaney for the victory there after a dominant race. Also for Penske, it was a double up on a historic weekend where they were celebrating the 60th anniversary of Penske Racing. In both the IndyCar and the NASCAR race, the Penske team scored the pole and then won the race, of course with 2 different drivers. Blaney getting his 18th career win, his second at Phoenix. Logano had won the pole earlier in the day, and then Blaney had won stage 1 prior to having penalties that rendered him to the back and having to come back to the front. So it was a resourceful performance and also a great performance in general in a celebratory weekend for the organization. Joe Gibbs Racing dominated the race with Christopher Bell, but you had Ty Gibbs and Denny Hamlin also finish in the top 5. Chase Briscoe, prior to his wreck, was running in the top 5. So the Joe Gibbs Racing team showed their strength after a slow start to the year at road course and 2 super speedway type events. Tyler Reddick's great start to the year with 3 consecutive wins, ended up with an 8th place finish at Phoenix, but he was able to score stage points and holds a 60-point lead on Blaney heading into this weekend's race at Las Vegas. Logano led 74 laps, but ended up triggering a couple of accidents, and that led to a record number of cautions, 12 cautions for 86 laps. Logano ended up finishing 31st in the race, but had speed early in the day. And then in terms of a marathon mentality, this is a 26 race regular season, 4 races in. For Reddick, he's got a huge points lead, but for the likes of Ryan Blaney and Reddick's teammate Bubba Wallace, they have good points situation, and also Toyota leads the manufacturers. So those are all things that were covered and we will continue to cover all things NASCAR, IndyCar here on Motorsports Reports. On a weekend where Penske Racing celebrated their 60th anniversary, it was a sweep of the two major races, the IndyCars for Joseph Newgarden and Ryan Blaney getting the victory in the Straight Talk Wireless 500 for Penske in the Cup Series. The driver of the Dent Wizard Ford Mustang number 12 was able to win a second consecutive race at Phoenix and continue a streak of 9 top 5 finishes in his last 10 races at this racetrack. Puts an end to Tyler Reddick's 3-race winning streak to start the year. Reddick ended up 8th in this race. Blaney was able to recover from 2 loose wheels, having to come from the back, and used a 2-tire call by his crew chief Jonathan Hassler late in the running, while Christopher Bell, who was a dominant presence in this race, ended up taking 4 tires, so similar to what happened last November for Denny Hamlin versus Kyle Larson. Similar situation happened there. Blaney was able to make a last lap, last turn pass to win the race in November. In this case, he made the pass on the final restart. From Blaney, some of what he said, just perseverance. I mean, everybody on the 12 group persevered all day. We had a couple of mistakes that we learned from, got better, had to come from the back a couple of times. He went further to say, obviously, the 20 was the best car, but Jonathan made a great call to take 2 on the last stop. We were able to get the lead, hold him off. I don't know how many more laps I could have held him off. Referenced the team and saying, really proud of everyone on Team Penske who swept the weekend, with Newgarden winning yesterday, us winning today. Can't wait to see Roger. Can't say enough about the 12 guys for keeping their head down, doing what they do, and Jonathan again for making a good call at the end. Bell restarted 8th as the first car with 4 tires, while Blaney had started on the second row and moved past Bell's teammate Ty Gibbs with 10 laps to go. Bell was quoted as saying, ultimately, if we had more green flag laps, I think we could have made a run at him. I went further to say, I don't know. You win some, you lose some. This one stings, but on the positive side, I'm really proud of our entire team. It's something to build on. It was a day that we needed. We got a lot of stage points, finished second, just bummed whenever they get away like that. Rest of the top 10 was Kyle Larson, Ty Gibbs, and Denny Hamlin in the top 5. Bubba Wallace, William Byron, Tyler Reddick, Michael McDowell, Eric Jones was rounding out the top 10, and Shane Van Gisbergen recovering to 11th after spinning out a couple of times or having incidents. While the win streak comes to an end for Reddick, he maintains his points lead of 60 over Ryan Blaney now, and Chris Bell moves up from 24th to 6th in the standings. So those are things there. Anthony Alfredo was filling in for Alex Bowman, finished 33rd after being collected in a multi-car wreck that was triggered by Joey Logano. Race featured 12 cautions, which was tied to track record, and had 8 leaders with 23 lead changes. The next Cup race will be at Las Vegas next Sunday, the Pnezoil 400, presented by Jiffy Lube. Please tune in to Motorsports Reports for all your NASCAR and IndyCar news, and also tune into the Gripster podcast that I host with my good friend Josh Fine on all podcast platforms.